Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the week's major developments in politics, including how California lawmakers are reacting to the Trump-Putin summit. And the whopping cleanup bill for last fall's North Bay wildfires is raising concerns about greed and lack of oversight. Plus, how climate change is fueling this year's intense fire season and damaging California's environment. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin with politics. There's continuing confusion over what was said during President Trump's private meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday in Helsinki. After initially saying he did not believe Russia had interfered in American elections, President Trump later told CBS News he had been firm with Mr. Putin about not putting up with such interference. The shifting statements from the president drew condemnation from top Democrats and some Republicans. Then on Thursday, the White House said President Trump will invite Vladimir Putin for a second meeting in Washington, D.C. this fall. Meanwhile, in California, the state Democratic Party snubbed Senator Dianne Feinstein by endorsing her rival, Kevin de León, in this November's general election. The move comes as Feinstein prepares to take a leading role in the looming partisan battle over confirming Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Joining me now to discuss all of this are KQED political reporter Marisa Lagos, San Francisco Chronicle senior political writer Joe Garofoli, and political consultant Sean Walsh. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Well, Joe, you know, there's been a lot of criticism over the Helsinki meeting and what President Trump said afterwards. What's been the reaction from California Republicans in congressional races as they're trying to determine control of the House?
So I reached out to all the Republicans in all the hot House seats here, 9 Republicans, and I said, what did you think of what the president said, what the president initially said? And none of them would criticize Trump by name. They said, oh, Putin's a mess, he's evil, all this stuff. Nobody would criticize Trump. And that speaks to the power of Trump and his supporters, even in blue California. These folks want to get elected, and they need that core of Trump supporters to support them.
I mean, and we saw later in the week, because things move so quickly, you know, this indictment of somebody that the federal prosecutors say is working as a Russian agent. We actually had Dana Rohrabacher, a congressman from Orange County, come out and call that bogus. There were reports, and they had acknowledged that he had met with her at some point. So I think Rohrabacher is the only one totally digging in, really, on the side of Russia.
He is Putin's favorite congressman.
He is Putin's favorite congressman. There's actually a billboard up Democrats have put up. So I think that race is going to be interesting to watch around this Russia issue. I think for a lot of people, this may be appalling and it may be sort of crazy that we're having these conversations, but it's probably not going to be the #1 issue going to the polls.
Well, Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee essentially blocked a move by Democrats to subpoena the interpreter from the Helsinki summit. How much will these ongoing concerns about Russian meddling and also over President Trump's handling of these worries mobilize Democrats for the midterms?
I mean, I think that's what Democrats are hoping, right? And I think that's really the key, especially in these key congressional races. You're not talking about convincing Trump voters or hardcore Republicans that they should vote against their own party. You want to get the Democrats who didn't vote, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, out to the polls. And I do think that there's some indications that there could be some of that Democratic excitement. We've seen some strong fundraising numbers from some of these pretty new Democratic candidates. So, I think that's really where Democrats need to focus, not on trying to, pull people over from the right.
Well, and Sean, amid all of this, right, amid all of the backpedaling, back and forth statements from President Trump, he now says he's inviting President Putin to the White House this fall. What do you make of this?
Well, look, as long as you're talking and not shooting, it's not a bad thing. With regards to Joe, I'm not sure it's the power of the Trump voters. I think what it is the closeness of this election cycle. These races in California are going to be so close that if you peel off even a few percentage points of people, you lose. So that's why they're hesitant to go out and criticize President Trump. With regards to the subpoena of the interpreter, that's just ridiculous. It's a complete political stunt. There's executive privilege that the president has. It's never going to happen. So that's just politics on the Democrats' part. I think the real issue, which is interesting, is every morning the Republicans wake up and it's like, oh my God, what is it going to be today? And so in January, Republicans were very disheartened. I think they thought they were going to lose the House by 52 votes. About a month ago to 3 weeks ago, they were in great shape. They felt that with the Social Democratic Party, this election in New York, and all the mayhem on the Democratic side, they were actually feeling really good and their poll numbers were trending their way. And now with Russia, the poll numbers have gone down. So it's
and
like
the immigration stuff at the border, I think, was really, you know, a moment where you saw a lot of, you know, even more moderate Republicans, people like former First Lady Laura Bush, really come out swinging. And so,
well, I would say though that the fact that the ban ICE movement has actually played against the Democrats. So again, Republicans were feeling great 3 weeks ago. It's like being on a roller coaster down at Great America. It's like, whoa, you're up, and whoa, you're down. You just don't know what you're going to get.
Well, how much of this will stick, though, right? Because a number of critics have come out and said what President Trump said after the meeting with Putin amounted to treason. How much of that will stick, or is it just like Teflon? It just, you know.
There is so much. So think about last week, okay? He goes to the NATO meeting, basically says that our NATO allies are our opponents. Then he says Angela Merkel is, you know, not helping us out. I actually think it was right on the natural gas issues. But every single day he says something new. You had the EPA secretary resign in disgrace.
We're not even talking about
here today,
that.
gone tomorrow, poof. So literally, this guy drives so many news things. It's like.
Is any of it swaying his base, or they're still firmly behind him despite all of this?
I think the base is firmly behind him. Again, no offense to you august media people, but I do think that in certain ways, when the media comes out so white hot and attacks him, that in some weird sort of way solidifies his base and other people just saying they're just.
But what's different about
so.
this one with the Putin stuff is that he had the Fox News people coming out against him, which rarely happens. Very tepidly so. They would say things like, "It wasn't his best day." You know, they were not,
but even they seem to be in shock.
If they're even saying
guys,
that, though, but if they're even saying that, that's something unusual.
So none of this. Foreign policy doesn't matter to most. It does matter. So I'm swampy.
It does not matter to most
Republican.
It does not matter to us, but nobody else.
The one thing you can't do as Republicans is say that Russia is good. They have historically been bad to us. They spy. They put different kinds of poisons with their own signature on it, killing people off around the world. So, you know, as a Republican, they'll put up with a lot. They want the court to change the way it's been changing. They want Supreme Court, but they will not say that Russia is good. It just goes against our fundamental DNA.
Which I think, to your question, Tweet, is it just depends. It depends on what happens between now and Election Day. It depends on what is, I would argue, really leading the news as ballots are mailed out, and in California especially, but, you know, nationally. And this roller coaster just keeps going. And so I think that's going to be the problem for Democrats, is to try to, you know, rehash these things. And does anybody care when it's been 3 months?
Right. And Putin will be visiting Washington as people are still casting ballots, which is like, well, how does that summit go?
Well, maybe. They said in the fall. I don't think they set a date for it. The one thing I will tell you, though, is we're talking all about Republicans. Let's not forget, you're only as good as your opponent. You only have to run as fast as the guy next to you before the bear gets him. And the Democrats are having a civil war within their party. I mean, you got the socialists now that have an active movement. Bernie Sanders is going to be out campaigning with these groups. And I will tell you, that is not something the Democrats want to be facing going into a fall election.
And on that issue, that gets to what happened with the Dianne Feinstein situation, right? The state Democratic Party endorsed her rival in the U.S. Senate race, Kevin De León, even though she campaigned hard for them to not have any endorsement at all. What does that suggest to you about the state of the Democratic Party right now?
That doesn't, first of all, for some context, that was the executive board of the Democratic Party. That was 300 people out of 2,800 delegates. So, and that doesn't change.
And millions of voters.
And millions of voters. I mean, Feinstein won 70% of Democrats in the primary.
She carried all 58 counties.
Including her opponents.
Including his district. She's got, you know, about $8 million in the bank, and she's worth at least $55 million. You know, he's got 10 cents. I mean, it's going to be hard for him to even cut her lead much.
It's completely irrelevant for the election and her reelection. It is relevant insofar as what's going on in the belly of the beast of the Democratic Party.
Well, so I want to say, though, that I don't think it's, I don't agree with you, Sean, that it's as bad as you're saying. I mean, I think you can see a lot of parallels with the Tea Party. And yes, that has not been great for the Republican Party long term. But when it came to elections, that did excite the right, the base that they needed to take back the House. And I think that, you know, for people who you talk to who are these delegates, who were Bernie delegates 2 years ago and are just getting involved, they're very happy to see that there's this sort of movement happening. And so you're right. Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, they're not happy about this. But I think, you know, it could play well for some voters in the coming months.
I mean, it may not change the U.S. Senate race, like you said, right? But I think what's interesting here is they sort of symbolize these two factions. You have Feinstein, kind of old school politics. She's 85. She's the oldest member of the Senate. And then you have De León, who's the son of immigrants. He's 51, a lot younger. He wants to abolish ICE. He believes President Trump should be impeached. And so how is that rift going to play out come November, especially when Democrats are trying to retake control of the House?
Well, it could go, as Marisa said, it could be an energizing thing. But already, De León has influenced Feinstein on a couple of issues. She suddenly is against the death penalty, which she said, oh, I've been against it for years, which she neglected to tell anybody about.
Immigration policies.
Immigration policies.
And
she's been much more vocal against calling out Trump.
And she's okay with legalizing marijuana, recreational marijuana.
Well, that came out of nowhere because he was hardcore against it for a long time. And let's not forget, she is going to have a prime time free TV spot for weeks when the Supreme Court hearings happen.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
That is where she is going to play to the left and the activists in the party. She is going to hammer this appointee, particularly on his writings and dealings in the Bush administration regarding enhanced interrogation techniques. So she's going to love it. It's going to help her politically with her activists. So,
but I do think it was a sign, and I think, you know, the Crowley upset that you mentioned in New York. I think, you know, people like Dianne Feinstein need to take these challenges seriously, even if they are way better funded. Look, as Joe said, you need money to get on TV. De León doesn't have it. I think it would be a mistake for, you know, Feinstein to not take him seriously, but she's got plenty of money and she's going to get plenty of earned media, and I think she'll win.
Also, she has not yet agreed to a debate. Well, she's agreed that she will debate, but she hasn't scheduled it yet.
What does that mean, debate, right?
She said it on the record to us in the Chronicle that she will debate, but that hasn't.
I heard she's debating the same night that John Cox.
Yeah, exactly. Who is she debating? We don't even know.
It'll be a Sunday in Fresno at 3 p.m.
The real change could come after the election, of course. If Democrats win or lose, I think in the House especially, we're going to see a big fight over leadership and the direction of the party, and I think that's where that will really bubble to the surface.
Okay, so we're talking a lot about divisions, but one thing that is staying undivided is the state of California.
That is true.
The 3 California ballot measure that went down to pretty much a defeat in the state Supreme Court. The court basically said that it amounts to a change in the state constitution, and in order for that to happen, it has to be decided by the legislature before going to the voters. So is this the last we'll hear of it, or do you think VC Tim Draper, who's been behind it, will come back swinging?
Oh, as long as Tim Draper has money in his checkbook, he's going to bring this back. But let's look at why he's doing this, and this speaks to a lot of concerns that all sorts of people have about California isn't working well. 1 out of every 5 people live in poverty. You know, there's the health system doesn't work. There's a lot of problems here, and this is like a very clumsy way to address it. But politicians should heed this as this is a warning sign. People are unhappy.
Well, there's the citizen legislature one, too. We should all have 32 representatives. I mean, but I think you're right.
All ideas,
the underlying issues are important. But yes, I agree with Joe. As long as Tim Draper has money, he'll probably keep pushing this.
Was this just somebody rich in Silicon Valley throwing his money at something and not really understanding the political intricacies of policy?
Tim Draper's a very, very bright guy. He cares passionately about the state. I subscribe to what Joe says exactly. I think that he thinks that the state is out of control. We've got a housing crisis here, and yet you've got the same group that actually filed suit against him to stop this, has environmental policies through CEQA and others that stops housing from being built. You couldn't get a bike lane for 3 years built in Berkeley because of these environmental laws. So he thinks that the state's a little out of control with pet projects, and when you're smart enough like he is and rich enough like he is, your vote counts a little bit bigger than some other.
We all got to get those ties he's selling, though. Those 6 California ties. Tim, if you got one, send it to me at the Chronicle.
Those are the oldies.
Items now.
Yes.
All right, Sean Walsh, political consultant, Joe Garofoli with the San Francisco Chronicle, and Marisa Lagos at KQED. Always nice to have you on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
The deadly wildfires that swept through the North Bay last October burned more than 240,000 acres and claimed 43 lives. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers supervised the massive cleanup effort, removing more than 2 million tons of debris from Sonoma, Napa, Lake, and Mendocino counties. The bill for the cleanup was more than $1 billion. But a KQED investigation found troubling flaws in how the cleanup contracts were awarded and executed. Joining me now is KQED criminal justice reporter Sukey Lewis, who did the investigative report. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So this price tag is huge. It's whopping $1.3 billion, the most expensive disaster cleanup in California history. What was this money spent on, and how much did it come out to per parcel?
So what happens is the Army Corps of Engineers actually has these contracts in place before disaster strikes so that they can get going immediately and start removing debris and such stuff like that. So the companies that they brought in actually had a lot of experience doing debris removal, but from hurricanes, because that's what the Army Corps has done in the past, is hurricanes, floods, other kinds of disasters. And this was actually the first wildfire cleanup that the Army Corps of Engineers had done. And so that price tag then gets, basically given to these contractors, who are then given the task of hiring truck drivers, hiring contractors, hiring all the subcontractors who are going to actually, do the work on the ground. And that came out to about $280,000 per parcel.
That's massive. How does it compare to prior disaster cleanups?
Well, that's what really struck me, and actually why I started looking into this, is because there was a big cleanup in 2015 after the Valley Fire in Lake County that also devastated more than 1,000 homes. And the cleanup from that averaged about $77,000 to $80,000 per parcel. So this is a jump of $280,000 per parcel, which is just really significant.
Almost 4 times.
Yeah.
So the Army Corps of Engineers managed this project, which means the taxpayers are footing the bill, essentially. Your investigation found that the multi-million-dollar contracts they were awarding actually incentivized destructive and unsafe work. How so?
Well, part of the problem is that they pay by the ton. So that incentivizes...
By ton of debris.
By ton of debris, exactly. And so that incentivizes people to get the work done as quickly as possible, which is a positive. But it also incentivizes them to do it unsafely. And so what we can, what I found in my reporting is that incentivized truck drivers to overload their dump trucks, and that can be really, really dangerous, and also to take material that did not need to be taken. And so kind of taking away concrete pads, taking away, extra soil and
People's
loading it into their trucks.
Which they wanted to keep.
Yes, yeah. And so that led to a couple of, pretty significant problems, one of which was a serious accident that happened when a truck driver lost his brakes on a steep hill in the Fountain Grove neighborhood, and resulted in a devastating 10-car crash. A woman who actually lost her home in the wildfires was paralyzed in that accident. And then this ongoing issue of excavation, over-excavation, where homeowners are kind of coming home to see if they can rebuild and coming home to a hole, basically. Because
so much was dug out to basically have as much debris and as much tons of debris as possible. So are there any charges being filed then against some of these companies? So are there some related issues of prosecution that are being looked at? The district attorney in Sonoma County is looking closely at that accident, the 10-car accident. The Contractor State License Board issued a number of citations to contractors who were actually not licensed by the state of California to be doing this work. And the Army Corps of Engineers is also still investigating a very serious accident where a man named Ezekiel Sumner was killed when, the OSHA did an investigation and determined that his truck was tampered with, and that caused the trailer on his truck to run him over. And you also looked into the histories of some of the contractors they used, the Army Corps of Engineers used, and some of them actually have prior records of allegations of waste and fraud. What did you find? So yes, I found, kind of going back to Katrina, that the Government Accountability Office has taken this industry and particular players in it to task for overcharging taxpayers, for doing what's called load mixing, which is basically mixing in concrete, metal, heavy things into their loads to, again, get the weight and
again, results in overcharging and price gouging and things like that. The number of companies are under investigation by the Florida District Attorney, or the Florida Attorney General, I'm sorry, for price gouging related to Hurricane Irma cleanup that happened last year.
So how is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers responding, and do you anticipate they will change their contracting methods in the future in response to future disasters?
I think there are a lot of high-level conversations going on about that right now. I've talked to FEMA officials. I've talked to Army Corps officials. The Army Corps has been kind of fairly reticent about communicating how they are going to change. But in talking to FEMA, they said, basically, like, we have learned a lot of lessons. And you're going to see those as these companies come in to recompete for new contracts, new disaster cleanup contracts. You're going to see those lessons reflected in the bidding process.
All right, Sukey Lewis, really some wonderful work here. Thank you for being with us. KQED criminal justice reporter Sukey Lewis.
Thank you, Twee.
We turn now to the fires that are currently burning. This year's fire season in California is off to the worst start in a decade, and climate change may be playing a role. Dry, hot conditions along with warmer nights are making it harder to fight deadly blazes. And the multi-year state drought left behind millions of dead trees and vegetation. They can spark fires that burn quickly and out of control. And joining me now to discuss all of this is KQED science editor Craig Miller. Craig, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So CAL FIRE has already responded to hundreds of fires this year. Why has the start of this fire season been characterized as one of the worst in a decade?
And a lot of people, you might have noticed back a month or so ago, is also one of the earliest. You know, It's like, why is it starting so soon? It's, you know, it's not unusual to have wildfires in California in June, but I think this year, the size and the ferocity of the fires that hit early in the season really were arresting for people. You had the county fire, started up in Yolo County and started spreading west, eventually burned more than 140 square miles, an area bigger than Las Vegas, and moved very, very quickly, quadrupling in size overnight. And I think people were just generally alarmed by that. And it was pretty close to home, too. I was getting, you know, ash was falling like snow flurries in Vallejo, you know. Why? Okay, you might want to ask it. And the answer is last winter, I should say, little disappointing on the precipitation side. You know, overall precipitation and snowpack were below normal. Things started drying out very quickly. And I was talking with some of the guys who actually go out in the field and measure what they call fuel moisture, okay, basically the water content that's in the vegetation on the landscape. And they were finding moisture levels in June that they would normally see in August. So things dried out very quickly this year. Yeah.
And your reports also found another contributing factor, and that is nighttime temperatures. What's going on there?
Yeah, what is going on there? You know, this is really strange and also a little unnerving. You know, it's kind of what the insidious side of climate change, because it's happening when most of us are sleeping. You don't even notice it. But yeah, temperatures in general are rising. But what they found is that the overnight lows, the nighttime temperatures, are rising faster, at a faster rate than the daytime highs. Weird, huh?
Yes.
And so this has a lot of implications, actually, for agriculture and a lot of different things. But it also affects wildfires, because what it means is that you used to get this reprieve at night. Firefighters have been saying in recent years, you know, fires aren't laying down the way they used to, you know, at night. And, you know, because you used to get a little bit of a reprieve, temperatures would fall, humidity would go up, the vegetation could soak up some of that moisture from the air. But now you've got higher temperatures and lower humidity at night, and there isn't the moisture.
So those fires just keep burning.
They just keep going.
And, you know, so climate change seems to be having an impact here, right? And what do we know about the connection between global warming and fire season?
You know, you can never really say, it's still a dodgy proposition to say, well, this fire season, you know, is bad because of global warming. But we can say that fire seasons in general are getting worse because of global warming. They're getting longer, and we're seeing more catastrophic fires as well. And that's because, again, temperatures are rising, things are drying out, and there are other factors as well.
And so we have these rising temperatures now, enhancing droughts, like you just said. That drives more wildfires.
Right.
How else is climate change affecting California's environment?
Well, sea level rise is going to be a big one. In fact, we've got cities suing over that. But also, again, wildfires is another way that it's affecting. And
What about air pollution? Do all these wildfires then, as a result, affect air pollution in California as well?
Yes, in fact, it's becoming a challenge for cities who are already like not making their, thresholds, their air quality thresholds, So a lot of the smoke pollution from wildfires is actually setting them back on that. But the big thing is extremes, okay? You hear people talk about the new normal, a phrase that my boss hates, for good reason, because the new normal is, there is no normal. But weather events of all kinds, whether it's wet, dry, hot, are all becoming more extreme, and these extreme events are becoming more frequent, and that's really, I think, the hallmark of climate change in California.
And then we can't talk about this without talking about emissions as well. What's going on with emissions? Yeah,
well, it depends on where you're talking about. This is some of the good news involved. I mean, just a week or so ago, California, which had this goal of rolling back greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels, it was supposed to happen by 2020. It's already happened. So they were like...
So we're ahead of schedule.
Yeah, 4 years ahead of schedule, actually, because the latest data is from 2016. So that's good. The bad news is that California is only 1% of global emissions. So it's a little hard to move...
You've got the rest of the world to contend
It's a little hard to move the needle. But it is good news. And, of course, the problem is that the federal government is moving in exactly the opposite direction, promoting fossil fuels and actually, in some cases, undermining that momentum we had with clean, renewable fuels.
And you alluded to this earlier as well, the fact that some cities are taking this issue to the courts, right? We have the cities of San Francisco and Oakland. They're among about a dozen cities nationwide suing oil companies for costs that they say are associated with climate change, because they're going to have to deal with sea level rises and so forth in their communities. How are the companies responding?
The companies are basically taking the position that, number one, the courts are not the place to set climate policy. And number two, look, if you want to hold people accountable for, if you're saying that it's greenhouse gases and it's fossil fuels that are behind all this, then you should be suing everybody who drives a car, because all we do is produce a product that people buy. And so that's been their position anyway. And the courts have been a little bit friendly to that. I mean, the San Francisco and Oakland case was dismissed in federal court. But, just before we sat down, Baltimore, city of Baltimore, sued 26 fossil fuel companies in the state of Maryland. So there's a bit of a wave building here, and I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to try to handicap it, but I'm not sure how long oil companies are going to be able to fend this off.
Okay, something else to watch. I know you'll be watching it. Craig Miller, our KQED science editor, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And that will do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.